Rodriguez, and I am the principal of San Antonio Elementary School. I'd like to welcome you and thank you so much for being here this morning. I have a personal story that I'd like to share with you. My story is not unique. My story is the untold story of many, many parents in this community. It is a story of love, dreams, generosity, courage, conviction, and belief that one has the power to make a difference and change the world. Growing up, my parents dreamed of great things for me. Like every parent in every country and in every walks of life and every socioeconomic status, they wanted a great future for me. They believed that the key to success was my education. My dream, however, was to be a lawyer or an educator. I was born in Chihuahua, Mexico, and at the age of 14, my parents came to America and brought me to this land of opportunity where dreams become realities. We came in the pursuit of that dream, but their dream became my nightmare. America was not at all what I thought it would be. My parents so badly wanted me to understand that education was the key to my success. And I understood it and embraced it. However, here in America, for me, the hard labor that I had to endure and learned as a way of life was not as painful as being in the back room of a classroom, not knowing what the teacher was teaching me, not being accepted and feeling dumb. This was really a challenging time for all of us. So at age 16, I got married. The next big event came when my son Leo was born. It was such a joyous experience. After Leo's birth, my destiny became very clear to me. I was to be a stay-at-home mom. A turning point came the day that I brought Leo to school, the first day of kindergarten. That day is still so vividly in my mind when the principal was outside, extended his hand and invited me to become a volunteer. I felt so welcoming. He spoke to me in the language that I understood, and I could not say no. However, this meant that I needed to take a big leap. I needed to learn English. And it was good because at the time, my son and my daughter were both talking in English, and I had no idea what they were saying to each other, and I thought, this is not good. The following years became very challenging. Every step of the way, however, I was driven to get my GED, to get my college degree, and continue to go on. My drive came from a sense of gratitude to all those people that were alongside me, who believed in me and who pushed me. I was given a beautiful, beautiful wings to fly, and I have been flying ever since. My personal journey, however, has taught me so many things. I've learned that all parents in all cultural backgrounds and in any language want what's best for their children. That all parents need to be given that opportunity to get involved. They need to be invited, they need to be welcomed, and they need to be embraced. This is what United Way's partnership with the Grail Family Services is all about. The Yes We Can Read program brings families, kids, educators, and communities together around the ideal that knowledge is power and that the power of one can really change the world. I've seen it happen when parents become active and involved in their children's education. Everyone is given a pair of wings, and everyone wins. I am here because I was given that opportunity. I was given the opportunity to volunteer. Someone believed that I could make a difference and invited me to be part of that difference. Volunteering is a reciprocal blessing, however. You receive so much more than what you can give. I believe in my heart that one can make a huge difference. It is the power of one person, one moment, one smile, one encouraging word that can have ripple effects and can change the world for many, many people. I invite you to extend a hand and volunteer, for our future are our children. And now I'd like to bring up a man who has long championed making this a better place for our children and their families. the President of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, Dave Cortese. Joining him is Susan Prescott, Chair of the Board of the United Way.
The story and the woman both. So unfortunately, Supervisor Cortese's been delayed, so we're going to continue on, and we may have the opportunity to hear some words from him in a little while. Meanwhile, again, thank you very much to Norma for being here and sharing that story. And the first thing I'd like to do as I welcome you on behalf of United Way is to acknowledge a few folks here. Let's begin with our gold sponsors, HCL Technologies America and IBM Corporation. Yes, thank you. And also our silver sponsor, Hewlett Packard. I'd also like to thank elected officials and their representatives who are here from city, county, state, or education offices. And if you'd like to stand, we'd like to recognize you as well. I would also like to take the opportunity to recognize and thank my fellow board members, volunteers who work hard to further the mission of United Way in Silicon Valley. So those of you who are here, would you stand so we can recognize your hard work and dedication as well. So I would guess that most everyone in the room knows what United Way is about, but I'm just going to say a few words to make sure and maybe reassure you that it's still the case. That what we feel is really, really important is to help people acquire the tools that they need to lead quality lives. And I think we would probably all agree everyone deserves that opportunity. Really, it starts with what Norma talked about, access to a great education that results in income-earning jobs that in the end also provide access to health care. And as you saw in the beautiful video montage, those three pillars are really foundational for our efforts: income, education, and health. The building blocks of the foundation we all need to be successful. So we try to impact our community in those three areas through programs, strategic grants to partner agencies, our volunteers, our public policy advocacy work, our collaborations, all to make sure everybody can have that foundation around income, education, and health. You may have seen something in the way of your breakfast plate. That is our report to the community, and that has a lot of detailed information around the work to understand our community so we know how to move the needle in those foundational areas. We hope maybe you'll take a little bit of time later to see what's being done in our community. There's one more thing before I finish, which is I'd like to recognize another great part of the United Way effort, which is our staff. You can spot them in their several black t-shirts with big white logos. So if you guys wouldn't mind standing up, we'd like to thank you for your ongoing work and passion. It is my pleasure now to introduce a wonderful woman who has great vision, great passion, and great ability to steer the ship of United Way Silicon Valley to help improve the living conditions here, and that is Carol Lee Hutton.
I told Susan she could take all the time she wanted to embellish my intro. Apparently she didn't think I was serious. Thank all of you for being here. I'm very appreciative, and thank you, Susan, and thank you, Norma, for sharing your story. I'm so grateful to see this room as full as it is, but to tell you the truth, with those lights, it's hard to see much of you at all. But the fact that you're here tells me that you already appreciate the challenges and opportunities that we have here in Silicon Valley. You know, as many of you know, we live in a community in which the continuum from rich to poor is staggeringly broad. We live in a community in which some business leaders get salaries in the millions of dollars and bonuses many times that, and yet nearly a third of the workers get less than $15 an hour. We live in a community in which even during a brutal recession that I would argue has not ended, people here pay millions of dollars for homes that elsewhere in the nation wouldn't go for a quarter of that. And we live in a community known worldwide for its innovation, its creativity, and its invention. Not to mention that weather, thing that's going on here that makes it pretty perfect, right? So how is it possible that we have hungry children, nearly 14,500 of them on any given day in Santa Clara County? How is it possible that nearly a quarter of the families in this county don't have enough money to make ends meet from month to month, and more than 80% of those are working families that just don't get a wage that allows them to pay the bills, basic expenses? How is it possible that we have thousands of families, 14,000 kids in the county, without access to regular health care, the kind of prevention and the kind of treatment that many of us take for granted? How is it possible that 1 of every 2 Latino children under age 5 in this county lives below the federal poverty level? And mind you, the federal poverty level is a hideously poor standard for Silicon Valley because it pretends the cost of living is the same here as it is in Mississippi and Arkansas and other low-cost states. How is that, and so much more like it, possible in Silicon Valley in 2011? Well, I think it's possible because we have not captured this family spirit, this sense of invincibility that we have here, this level of expectation. We have not harnessed that to focus it on improving the quality of life here for all. Too many of our friends and neighbors don't know these things about Silicon Valley. And too many of those who do know these things feel that they don't have the voice to share them. We are such an amalgamation of transplants here, but too few of us reach across our own boundaries to really create the collaborations that identify causes and create solutions. That's why we have begun a series of conversations at United Way Silicon Valley. We think it's time to figure out what kind of a community people want this to be and what they're willing to do to make it so. What kind of a place do you want to live in? And what are you willing to do about that? We call these community conversations. They're held in small groups, in casual settings, and they have nothing to do with United Way. They have everything to do with who's on the couch, who's at the kitchen table, who's sitting in the folding chairs. Everything to do with who's doing the talking. If you live or work in Santa Clara County, we want to hear from you. We want to listen to you. We want to turn your aspirations into actions that will build and better this community. You have cards on your tables, and you can go to our website, uwsv.org, and join or start a community conversation. Put voice to your convictions. I promise you that you will be glad that you did that. Now I would like to invite Susan Prescott to return to the stage so that we can hand out some special awards. The first award that we'll give today is our Partner Agency Excellence Award. And this goes to the funded agency that really exemplifies partnership through collaboration, through superior performance against strategic grant deliverables. And I am so pleased and wish you to join me in congratulating Live Oak Adult Day Services and its Executive Director, Colleen Hudson. Next is our Live United Community Partner Award, which recognizes the highest level of corporate giving to the United Way Silicon Valley Community Action Fund. This, once again this year, goes to Intel Corporation for its corporate contribution of $592,000 last year. And I want to tell you, over the last 5 years, Intel's corporate contribution, this is in addition to its employee contribution, Intel's corporate contribution over the last 5 years totaled $2.9 million. How remarkable is that? Talk about a corporate citizen. The next award is our United Way Silicon Valley Community Builder. And this goes to a woman who can honestly be described as a gladiator in those nasty city and county budget arenas. Her strategic and forceful battles to save funds for critical programs this year benefited all of us and all of our constituencies. The community benefit sector and everyone we serve has a friend in Patricia Gardner, Executive Director of the Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits and United Way Silicon Valley's Community Builder. I can tell you know her. Okay, now I have the pleasure of awarding a very important award to us, our Philanthropists of the Year. And this couple have been loyal contributors to United Way for more than 30 years and are longtime members of our donor leadership circle, which supports our Community Action Fund. But they're known throughout this community, not just for their philanthropy, but for their civic and community engagement. They've got involvement in a wide variety of endeavors, helping us meet not only basic needs in this community, but contributing to arts and culture. Please join me in showing your appreciation for United Way Silicon Valley Philanthropists of the Year, Ned and Jimmy Farnholm.
Thank you very much, Carly, and thank you to United Way for this really amazing award. I appreciate that on behalf of both Jimmy and myself. We're very honored. You know, I feel very fortunate to have started my career as a young engineer at Hewlett-Packard in the 60s. And I had a chance to observe Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, and not only were they great corporate leaders, but they were terrific role models for community involvement. So as a very young engineer, I learned very early on the importance of giving back, and in particular, helping out in our local communities. I also learned about United Way and had a chance over the years to participate in a number of United Way boards, campaign cabinets, wash cars, do all the other fundraising things within the company, and frankly had a lot of fun. These were great times. So while I know there's many global issues that we all worry about, and these are all important, I have a personal belief that philanthropy needs to begin at home, in our own neighborhoods, in our own local communities. And Dave Packard once said that as employees, we have a responsibility to help every community where we operate to be better because we're there. And we have an obligation to help those who are less fortunate than ourselves. And I have carried this message, Jimmy and I have carried this message in our philanthropy over the course of many years. And I believe the United Way is the best, certainly one of the best ways to support the local community. So, so I've been a big supporter, Jimmy and I have been big supporters of United Way for over 40 years. And we're very proud of the work that United Way does. So thank you to United Way for all the great work that you do, and thank you for this really amazing award. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to keep Susan up here for just another minute because now I have the pleasure of bringing up to the stage a man who has spent a lifetime in public service in this community and who certainly is known as a champion for the lives of children, particularly here in Santa Clara County. Joining me now, President of the Board of Supervisors of Santa Clara County, Dave Cortese.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. More importantly, thank you so much for supporting United Way. This is, with all the awards going on, this is actually an award for United Way. And there's a little story behind this in that we have been involved, my office and some of the other supervisorial offices, in supporting the Earned Income Tax Credit Program, which was just a fledgling program, as I'm sure many in the room know. A few years ago, United Way, Catholic Charities, and other partners got together and just expanded this to the point where it's its own stimulus package, just bringing millions and millions of dollars of money back into the community that families, particularly indigent families, have already earned but don't know how to collect. And I showed up the last time we had a small celebration of volunteers for that program without a resolution that I had intended to bring. So this is so much better because I brought a full proclamation adopted unanimously by the Board of Supervisors, signed by each one of us and the clerk of the board to present today. So Carol Lee, I made good on my promise that I'd be back with the resolution. But I think it represents obviously much more than that program, and I appreciate the reference to Santa Clara County's Year of the Child because without United Way, there's no government entity that can lift up the children in this community the way it's done through the efforts of community-based agencies. So with that, I'd like to present this resolution, again, adopted unanimously by the Board of Supervisors, myself, Mike Wasserman, Ken Yeager, George Shirakawa Jr., and Supervisor Lindsay.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Cortese. We so appreciate that. Now, I get the pleasure of introducing a man who has inspired me to think differently about our work and about what we do. And inspiring me is, not an easy thing. A lot of you know that. The bar is kind of high on that. So I am so excited about this. Rich Harwood is the president and founder of the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation, and he is a leading national authority on empowering people to live their best public life. He's the author of several books and essays and a regular blog that I never miss. He's a frequent contributor and commentator on national broadcasts on the subject of community and people and public life. But to us at United Way Silicon Valley, he's the guy helping us figure out how to really move the needle on community change. So I am so pleased that I can share him with you today. Please join me in welcoming Rich Harwood.
Good morning. Can you all hear me? Great. First, another round of applause for all our award winners this morning. Second, I get asked to speak at a lot of United Ways, and I pick the ones I come to, and this one was one that I really wanted to come to. There are a handful of United Ways across America who are really in the vanguard of demonstrating and transforming themselves to create community impact in their communities, to really make a difference in their communities. And this United Way in Silicon Valley is one of those United Ways in the vanguard. So I hope you'll join me in a round of applause for Carol Lee Hutton and her leadership. As the morning speaker, I'm supposed to have a really good introduction, a really good conclusion, and to keep the distance between the two of them very short. But we live in serious times. And I wonder if you'd give me a few minutes to talk about some serious topics, about the condition of our country, about why I believe United Way and the organizations that you represent here today are needed today, perhaps more than ever before in the history of this country, and what I believe it's going to take for us as individual leaders to create the kind of communities, the kind of society that we aspire to have in this valley and in this country. You know, earlier this year, my 21-year-old daughter Emily and I took a trip to Germany together, where we visited the Nazi death camp Dachau. And so we spent a day going through Dachau, looking around and taking the surroundings in. And as Emily and I went back from Dachau to Munich that night to have dinner, we were sitting at dinner and I was looking across from her, and I said, Emily, you know, there's something that's still pulling me back to the death camp. There's unfinished business for me at the death camp. There's something I still need to resolve in myself about what we just saw today. For those of you who have children, my daughter gave me one of the greatest gifts a daughter can give to a father. She looked across the table and she said, Dad, I know that we have been planning for months what we're going to do tomorrow. I know that we have a whole day's schedule planned out. But Dad, what I want you to do is to go back to that death camp tomorrow morning by yourself. Let's cancel what we were planning to do. I'll take care of myself here in Munich. You go back and figure out what you still need to think about. And so I woke up at 5:30 the next morning and I got on the first train to Dachau. And I got there just a little bit after 7 in the morning. My understanding was that the death camp wasn't to open until 9 a.m. And so I thought I'd sit outside the camp and write in my journal and think some more about what I was about to encounter. But something came over me, and I decided to walk up to the gate, the same gate that the prisoners were taking from the cattle cars into the death camp to meet their death. And I pushed on it, and it opened. And I walked through that gate into the death camp, which is this vast area, and I was the only person there, and would be the only person there for the next 2 hours. And so I walked to the courtyard of the death camp, which is about the size of 3 football fields. And there I stood for about an hour saying my Hebrew prayers with tears streaming down my face. And I was reminded of a stark reality, that sometimes in our lives apathy does exist, that sometimes we are indifferent to other people, that sometimes we turn our backs on others, and sometimes we even hide from one another, just when people need us most. And so after standing there for an hour, I decided to walk back toward the crematory in the gas chamber, back toward the north wall. And as I started to make my way there, there was an opening in the wall that hadn't been there the day before. And so I decided to walk through it. And I found myself in another courtyard, this time very small. And I was standing inside a Catholic monastery, a monastery that the Sisters of Carmel had created in the mid-1960s. And I turned to my left and I saw a glass enclosed display case. And in it were vestments made from the tattered clothes of the dead prisoners. And I turned to my right, at the end of the courtyard was another door, and I walked over to that door and I pushed on that door. And inside I found a small Catholic chapel. And so I sat there for another 20 minutes and prayed some more. And as I came out, I looked to the other side and I saw yet another door. But this time there was a window next to it. And so I walked over to that window and I peered inside. And back looking at me was a sister in her habit. And she came around to unlock the door and she invited me in. And we talked about her good work at the monastery. As I walked from the courtyard of the monastery back into death camp, I was also reminded that one person stepping forward can make a difference. That it is possible for us to redeem ourselves. That it is possible for us, even amid all the evil and the trouble in our society at times, it is possible to tap the innate goodness that exists within each and every one of us. It is possible to do that. Now, we face challenges in our country. Luckily, it's not a Holocaust, but we are facing the worst recession since the Great Depression. And like Carolee, I believe that this recession is far from over. And not only do we face this recession, but our politics are toxic. There are very few leaders that citizens actually believe in and trust. So many of the organizations that they look at seem more concerned about their own survival and their own good rather than the common good. And yet, as I travel this country, which I do every week, what I find, and I suspect you find it here in the Valley as well, is that right beneath the surface, there is a yearning among Americans to come back into the public square, a yearning to re-engage and reconnect with one another, a yearning to restore their belief in ourselves and as individuals and collectively that we can make things happen. There is that belief. There is that belief. But as we know, nothing is automatic in life. Simply because we say we want to re-engage doesn't mean it's going to happen. Simply because we say we want to reconnect doesn't mean it's going to happen. Surely, since we say we want to restore our faith in ourselves and each other, if you just watch Washington, D.C., it's not happening. It's not happening. There is a question on the minds of people that those of us in this room need to be able to answer if we want to successfully re-engage and reconnect people and help restore their faith in themselves and in each other. And it's a basic question. It's not a sophisticated question. And it's not really a political question. It's a question about our human condition. What I hear people asking over and over again is, who can I trust? Who can I trust in my community to create safe spaces that I can come back into, where there won't be so much finger pointing and acrimony and blame placing? Who can I trust to put the tough issues on the public agenda? The issues that Carol Lee talked about. The issues that people care about, that matter to them in their own lives. Not the issues that are simply our board or our funder tells to put on our agenda. Who can the single mom who has 2 young kids who she sends off every day knowing full well that they're going to an inadequate public school, and then she has to repeat it day after day after day? Who can she trust to create real impact so that we improve public schools and make a real difference in the lives of her children? And who can we trust to bring us together to make a difference? Not to do make-work volunteer efforts, but to do things that matter in people's lives and really make a difference. Who can we trust to do that? You know, as I've been trying to answer that question, what I've found is that there's something really important that those of us who want to lead these efforts need to do. And it's something really basic, but it's something incredibly difficult at times. And it's that we need to turn outward. That if we want to regain people's trust, if we want to re-engage and reconnect them, then we need to turn outward, which is first and foremost an orientation, a posture, a mindset, a way we think about things, the direction in which we're facing. I've done a lot of research that says that too many of our organizations are faced inward. We're more concerned with our own organizations and the community itself. We spend more time worrying about process than we do about progress. We're too consumed with activities at the expense of action. How, in Lord's name, can we solve the problems of not enough kids having enough to eat if we're looking inward at our own organization, worried about our logos and the color of our logos, thinking that maybe that'll make us more relevant and significant in the life of the community? And I say that standing here and saying to you, I just changed my logo, and it's color. And I hope to hell I get more money. But it's not going to make my work one iota more significant or relevant in the life of people in our communities. And so I have 3 questions that I want to ask you today. 3 tests of turning outward. 3 basic tests that I'm going to ask you to think about today and as you go back to your work. The first one is this. If I asked you to come into a room like this, and instead of me standing here, I asked you to bring 150 people from the communities in which you work, and I asked you to stand on the center table in the middle of this room, and I asked you to look into the eyes of the people in this room and say to them what their aspirations are, what their concerns are, what keeps them awake at night, what most important values are they trying to express in their lives? Could you do it? Could you do it? Could you stand on the table and tell people that? And would they believe you? I once asked my rabbi this question. Now, mind you, I belong to a small congregation in Washington, D.C. Newsweek magazine magazine named us one of the 25 most vibrant congregations in all of America. And I said to my friend Danny, the rabbi, if we brought our fellow congregants into our small sanctuary, and I asked you to stand up on the table and tell the congregants not about the Jewish religion, not about what the Old Testament says, not about the 600 plus laws of Judaism, but about their lives, and about their concerns and their aspirations, and how what we do here connects to that. Could you do it? And you know what he said to me? No, he couldn't. What about us? What about each of us in this room? Could we do it? Second question. Am I living up to the pledges and promises that I've made to the community? Now here I'm not asking you to go back to the PowerPoint deck you might have, or to the voluminous strategies we all have, or to our long to-do list, which we all have for sure. I'm asking you something more basic, something more solemn, something way more important. I'm asking you this. If you went into the quiet room in your home, or stood in front of the ocean, or picked your favorite place where you were by yourself, and in that moment by yourself you closed your eyes and asked yourself, at the essence of what I'm doing, am I living up to the pledges and promises I've made to this community? Are you doing it? Could you say yes? Could you say yes? Third question. Am I staying true to the urge within myself to do this work? You know, what I've discovered after 25 years of doing this work, that one of the most important things is that desire within each of us to make a difference. The thing that propelled you forward to work in your community. The thing that keeps you going in the face of adversity. The thing that you hold so dear to yourself because it is so important to yourself. And yet, what I find in this society, where we're activity happy and have all a long to-do list, is that we often forget this urge. We leave it behind, it gets discarded. Sometimes it gets denigrated. Sometimes people tell us, don't worry about that thing that's propelling you forward, just get your work done and meet the metrics, right? And what I'm here to say to you today is that we cannot create the kinds of communities that we want and that people aspire to unless we protect and bring forth this urge within us and allow it to continue to propel us forward so that we will stop at nothing to ensure that the children of this community get food, get a good education, and that there's income security for their families. We ought not to stop at anything to do that. Now, when I think about this turning outward, it reminds me of something that happened to me 15 years ago when I was doing work in Flint, Michigan. I'm sure you're familiar with that community. And we had been doing work there, engaging people about their own aspirations, their own concerns, what they wanted for the community. And so one night we decided to convene all the people, the hundreds of people we had touched and talked to a hotel downtown on Saginaw Street. We did it, unfortunately, in the middle of January. There was a blizzard. And if you've ever been to Michigan in the middle of January, you know it gets really dark really early. And so we thought no one would show up for this meeting. And yet, one by one, the good folks of Flint came through that door of the hotel into that room. And after we finished reporting out what we had learned about the community, what the community had told itself about itself, I started to ask people, so what do you think the community should do? And someone raised their hand and said, well, you know, I think the mayor needs to do such and such. And over to the right of me, I don't know if you've ever had this, I'm sure you've had this happen, over to the right of me, I saw, you're in a meeting and someone's leaning forward, you get the sense that they want to talk to you, they want to say something. And so over to the right of me, I could see this man who I came to know, his name was Mr. Brooks. And I saw Mr. Brooks leaning forward, but you know in the meeting where someone's leaning forward and they shake you off? They're not ready. And so Mr. Brooks shook me off. And so I asked another person, they rose and said, well, you know, the Community Foundation needs to do X, Y, and Z. And again, I saw Mr. Brooks on my right, leaning forward, wanting to speak. But again, he shook me off. He shook me off. And so a third person came and said, I think the arts groups and the public library need to do such and such. And I saw Mr. Brooks lean forward again. But this time, he was ready to talk. He was an older gentleman. And much like a lot of us in this room who are getting older, myself included, he grabbed onto the table with both hands and pulled himself up. and he was a short gentleman. And much like in a room like this, he looked out across his neighbors and folks from Flint, and he just stood there silently for a minute and took in what he was seeing. And then he uttered 3 words, which I will never forget. He said to his fellow folks from Flint, he said, "What about us? What about us? What are we in this room going to do? What about us?" In that moment, Mr. Brooks was declaring his intentions that only a community could bring a community back, not any single individual or funder or organization. 5 years after that, I remember sitting in the private conference room with the foundation president who funded our work, and his executive vice president looked at me, and with anger and disgust in her voice, she said to me, "But Rich, you didn't say Flint. You didn't say Flint." And I looked at her and I said, "No one person is going to say Flint, and certainly no one person from outside of Flint. But if you're willing to come out from your conference room, down onto Saginaw Street, and walk 4 blocks in any direction with me, I will take you to the East Side Civic Association and show you the good work that they're doing. I will show you the good work that Salem Housing Task Force is doing in building homes with people in sweat equity. If you go 4 blocks with me, I will show you the good work that the local United Way is doing as well." When I was getting on the plane to go to Dachau, to go to Munich, to fly over to Germany, the last email I picked up on the jetway going into the plane was from a woman named Annie Oper in Flint, Michigan, who works at Woodside Church. And one of the great honors I had was one Sunday being asked to preach there. In the subject line of her email, it said, Kiplinger Magazine names Flint, Michigan, one of 11 comeback cities for 2011. For 2011. I opened up the email, I clicked it open, and there I just saw one line. I hadn't talked to Annie in 10 years. And she said, Rich, you see, all the hard work over those years is paying off. Is paying off. Now, what was it that enabled the folks of Flint to be able to step forward in the face of great adversity, with tens of thousands of auto worker jobs being lost each year? What was it that enabled them to step forward and do the work? What is it that enables any of us in this room, day after day, to keep stepping forward and doing this work? I could tell you about all the sophisticated things that the Institute has created that answers this question. But I'd rather tell you about 2 things I think we need more than anything, particularly now in the country. And the first one is this. The first one we spend a lot of time talking about, but I'm not quite sure how present it is in many of our communities. And it's courage. I think we need courage. I think we need courage to put a stake in the ground and say to people in our communities, we want to be crystal clear about what we stand for. We want to be crystal clear about what we're trying to achieve. We want to be crystal clear so that you can see us and know how we're working in the community's interest. I think we need to put that stake in the ground, which requires courage. I think if we're going to want to turn outward and re-engage and reconnect people, we're going to need the courage to engage people who are often seen as being disenfranchised or left out in our communities, who we often talk about but never speak with. And for many of us, it's going to be uncomfortable to go to the places where they live, because for many of us, we haven't been there. But it's not too late. It's not too late. We need courage to figure out which partners we really need. As I work with groups across the country, what I keep finding over and over again is that we have too many partners who are holding us back and holding us down. We have legacy partners who long ago maybe made sense to work with, but it's time to cut loose from them. It's time to cut loose from them. And so I think we need the courage to figure out who is it that we really should run with to make a difference in our communities and to focus on them. I think we need the courage to understand the reality of our community and then to pick off our piece of the contribution about what we're going to try to resolve and act on. Which means we can't believe we can do everything, but it does mean we have to do some things. It does mean we have to do some things. And I think we need the courage to make a bet, a simple bet, that the number of people who may not like our new direction or our focus and where we put our stake, my friends, they're going to be far outnumbered by the number of people who are standing on the sidelines right now, waiting to trust someone to come back into the public square and re-engage and reconnect and restore their belief in themselves and others. There are far more people on the sidelines than those we will lose. And I think that's a bet worth taking. But you and I both know that courage by itself can often lead to arrogance, right? It can lead to hubris. Courage by itself can lead us astray. And so with courage, the flip side of courage, in my mind, in my experience, is humility. We lack a lot of humility in our country right now. And it seems to me if we're going to do this work, we need more humility. We need to know that at some point, we're going to have to pick up that stake we put in the ground and move it in public. Partly, maybe because the conditions in the community change, and we need to change with them. Or maybe we simply put it in the wrong place to begin with, and we need to move it. We need to have the humility. We need to have the humility to recognize that we don't have all the answers. And that to solve the kinds of problems, the challenges we're facing here in the Valley, we need all of us, not just some of us. And we need everyone's contribution. We need to know that if we're trying to mobilize people and gain more partners, the days of taking all the credit for the work that's being done have to be over. We need more humility to recognize that if we want people to come on the journey, then we better share the credit with them. We better share the credit with them. It seems to me that we need humility because in order to engage people, we need to open ourselves up and make ourselves vulnerable. And when we do, we will hear things that we don't want to hear. We will hear the pain that exists in the community, and we will hear at times people's complaint about our own shortcomings, about the pledges and promises we did not fulfill, about the stake that we put in the ground that wasn't a true stake. And it seems to me that if we want to re-engage and reconnect people and mobilize them for the common good, we need to have the humility to hear what they have to say and to stay in the game with them. And lastly, I think we need humility to recognize that we can't be all things to all people, that we have to make choices, and that in making choices, we are picking where we want to go and where we're not going. And so if we insist on being all things to all people, we won't be anything to anyone. And the kids that we're concerned about, the families we want to help stabilize and get a shot at the American dream, we won't be able to give them a true shot if we're working to be everything to all people. Now, when I started, I talked about why some of us do this work. And I think each of us has our own story. A number of you asked me this question as I was meeting this morning about why I do this. And so I want to tell you about how I got into this work and why I do it, not simply to tell you my story, but maybe to remind you of your own story, about why you do this work, about why it's so important. For me, what I've come to understand is that it started when I was a kid and I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, which in the early 1960s was a death sentence. No one ever expected me to make it this far, and certainly no one ever expected me to have the honor to talk here today before you. One of my doctors turned to my mother at one point and said to her, "Face it, he's a lemon. He's a lemon." I spent much of my childhood in hospitals and a good portion of my adulthood as well, with doctors and specialists and nurses all wearing their white coats and circling my bed, all talking to each other and never talking to me. I write a lot about hope. I suspect it's because I learned something about hope sitting in those hospital beds. Because for me, it was likely that tomorrow was not going to be better than today. It was likely that tomorrow was going to be worse than today. I spend almost every week of my life on the road somewhere, working with communities and groups. And to this day, like in the Hilton in San Jose, when I walk into a hotel room, it reminds me of a hospital room. It's only the last handful of years that I don't sleep in a hotel room with all the lights on and where I don't stay fully dressed in order to go to bed. But I was lucky. I was one of the lucky ones. When I was young, I met this guy named Ray Rivers, who became my coach all through youth sports. And Ray was the guy at Saratoga Racetrack, where I grew up in upstate New York, where he drove the tractor around Saratoga Racetrack after each race to smooth out the field for the thoroughbreds. And so when I was 8 years old, I joined Mr. Rivers' basketball team. And what I found out was that most of the games were on Saturday morning. And my parents insisted, like I insisted with my children, that I had to go to religious school on Saturday mornings. Unbeknownst to me, Ray found this out. And he went to all the other coaches in the league, his drinking buddies. And he sat them down, he said, I got this little Jewish boy who wants to play ball, but his parents won't let him play on Saturday morning, the times we've got scheduled. And so Ray got almost every one of our games rescheduled. I've coached youth sports for 30 years now. I've never seen anything like that before, and since. When I was playing ball with his son Danny in high school, in the dead of winter, much like in Michigan, where it gets really dark really early, it's really cold, Mr. Rivers would pick up 8 of us boys after basketball practice and stuff us in his Chevy Impala before seatbelt laws. But every night he came to practice and picked us up, all 8 of us. And for the next hour, 90 minutes, one by one, he dropped us off at our door and made sure that we were on the right path. I spent a lot of weekends at Mr. Rivers' house, and I have vivid memories of him and Mrs. Rivers coming back from food shopping. And I'm pretty sure they used government assistance to buy many of those groceries. And yet Mr. Rivers was always the one to say to all these high school kids, come on into the kitchen, eat whatever you want, let's drink together, let's have a picnic together. We want you in our home. We want you in our home. I tell you this because it's easy for us to forget people like Mr. Rivers. And yet it seems to me that the work that we do is about people like Mr. Rivers. People who might be in need, but people who are the backbone of our community and represent the goodness of our country. It's easy to forget. When I was at Princeton for graduate school, I had a professor who was an assistant secretary of commerce who used to come up from Washington, D.C. every week to teach us. And the course was on trade policy, and I remember raising my hand in one class and saying to the professor, what about the auto workers or the other workers who lose their jobs as we go through this transition period? And my professor said, that's not a relevant question for this class. When I worked on my 20th political campaign when I was 23 years old, where I was the top aide to all the senior people on the U.S. presidential race, and I sat in most of the meetings on polling and advertising and messaging, I kept for the life of me trying to figure out how our campaign related to Mr. Rivers. And what I found out was it didn't. And very few people on that campaign cared. They wanted to win, and they would do anything to win. And so what I found out is that my calling is less about striking fear in people's hearts and more about finding ways that we can repair the breaches in our society. When I worked for a swanky nonprofit in Midtown Manhattan, we were called down to Institute, West Virginia in 1985 with a chemical plant, Blue, the sister plant to the plant in Bhopal, India. And people there were worried about their safety and also their livelihood. Because if there were too many restrictions placed on the plant for their safety, they'd lose their jobs. And I'll never forget my colleagues from Manhattan saying to me as we were flying back from Charleston, West Virginia on the flight, turning to me and saying, I never want to go back to West Virginia again. The people there aren't educated. They drive beat-up cars. And there's an odor. There's an odor. It seems to me that we have to keep focused on what the essence of our work is, about why we're called to do this work, about why we're really trying to create the change that we're creating. So in conclusion, what I'd like to say today is that, sometimes this work we do can sound academic, but for me, there's nothing academic about it. Sometimes we can convince ourselves if we just check the boxes in the process or the approach or the model that someone's giving us to create change, that somehow that will be enough to create change and keep us on the path we ought to be on. Sometimes we forget that the survival of our organization is only relevant insofar as our organization serves the common good. not simply our own good. Sometimes we can forget that. And so for me, this work is a fight. That's what I've come to believe after all these years of doing this work. It's not a process, it's not a model, it's not an approach. At its heart, it's a fight. It's a fight to ensure that every person in Silicon Valley, in California, and the rest of the country has a place at the table and a voice in our public discourse, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of which side of town they come from, regardless of how much money they have in their wallet, and regardless of what kind of car they drive. It seems to me that this is a fight to create impact for that mom with 2 kids, where she wants to know, are we going to give her kids a shot at the American dream or not? It's a pretty basic question from where she sits. It's a fight to create that impact and move the needle on those issues. It's a fight to bring people back together in our country, to restore our belief in ourselves as individuals and in ourselves collectively, that we have the ability, the wisdom, the knowledge, the wherewithal, the power to make a difference in the world and to make a difference in our lives. And it seems to me it's a fight to turn outward toward our communities, and as they would say, United Way, find more and better ways to at least move in the direction of living united. And so I thank you. I thank you for having me here this morning. I thank you for listening at a breakfast. It's not always easy. I thank you for all the good work that you do. And most of all, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to know that we're in this fight together. Thank you so much.